This villa, built by Emperor Go-Mizuno, is composed of the upper tea house here and the middle and lower tea houses. This whole area is referred to in that way. Not just the tea hut itself, but the entire garden is called a tea house. I think that's because the influence of tea is fundamental. This garden is very different from those at Zen temples. It's another expression of the garden aesthetic. But at a fundamental level, the two approaches are quite similar. What you see in this garden is the broad face of the natural world. A Zen garden demands that you grasp all of nature in one moment, all at once. Here you are told to take your time. There's that difference. But in the end, both ask that you go beyond the garden, spiritually. That you look at the garden not merely as an object, but also as a path into the realm of the spirit. And the garden was constructed so that by the time they arrived, everyone would be ready to compose their poems. そういうふうに仕組まれていると思いますね。When you come here into this wide open space, and hear, for example, the sound of a bird, a single bird, and the bird song echoes over the hills, it's wonderful material for poetry.
What Shugakuin does so well is to borrow the neighboring valleys and hills. This makes for a friendly, intimate, gentle space. In contrast, the garden at Katsura closes out the rest of the world. It's a confined space.
The design of the buildings at Katsura is very refined. Most of the lines are straight, verticals and horizontals. Perpendicular lines suggest tranquility, while diagonals tend to cause uneasiness. Katsura uses mostly verticals and horizontals. That's why it feels so calm and elegant. In some places, the lines are slightly curved or swollen. I think that's by design. If they were absolutely straight, they'd feel too rigid. People explain this in various ways, but I think the slight curve gives the line a softer feel.
When I write a piece of music, I note on the score the kind of emotion I have in mind. I may think a piece about a garden should be calm and still. But at the same time, it should be a strong calm. So I say ecstatic. One might think you can't combine the two, calm and ecstasy. But there are moments in a Japanese garden that are very still and restful, but something intensely sensual, almost erotic, is going on at the same time.
The main purpose of a garden in an inn like this is to relax the guests, to help them feel at peace. That's its most important function. The Japanese have long preferred to live in the midst of nature. To have a garden that almost flows into a room is an ideal way of living. It's best for the garden to be as natural as possible. But to create a garden that looks natural in this tighter space requires a great deal of skill. It must be made to look natural, designed to appear natural. As Rikyu said about arranging flowers, they should appear just as they do in the field. But you can't achieve that by just taking a flower and sticking it in a pot. It takes real technique to make flowers seem natural.
In arranging flowers, you remove everything that's unnecessary in order to strengthen the composition. You might think that the more material that's used, the greater the value of the composition. But the opposite is true. The less there is, the more forceful the work. In flower arrangement, and in gardens as well, the Japanese value the beauty of the line. Strength of line is what matters most. By cutting back, an organic line comes to the fore. The point is to search for that organic line. By doing so, the essence of the plant is revealed. In Ikebana, it's not enough to be concerned only with the narrow, confined realm of the composition. That space only exists because there is a larger world outside. I realized that when I began arranging flowers. It was through Ikebana that I became interested in gardens. In other words, I became interested in exterior space as well as interior. So I began to design some gardens. For this garden, we cut the window very low so that guests eating dinner would see the garden by lowering their line of sight. It's an unusual angle. The point here was to confuse the viewer a bit. Is the garden inside or is it outside? A garden designer named Kobori Enshu first used a low window on a garden like this about 300 years ago. It was an unusual approach, and I borrowed the idea. To me, the more magnificent the tradition, the greater the challenge it presents to us to think about our own age. After all, those gardens were designed for medieval Japan. We have to think in terms of what we can create for today's world. It would be pointless just to copy what went before.
A museum is something like the frame of a painting. The artist provides the content, and the architect builds the frame that encases it. The building serves to protect the art and to connect it to its surroundings. The hill in back has a soft, curving line, and the sharp line of the building creates a contrast. People talk a lot about harmony with nature, but there can also be a tension with nature. That tension can create a different kind of harmony. Gardens play a key role in linking the building to the landscape around it. By asking the sculptor Isamu Noguchi to design this garden, we knew we would get a garden that bridges the building and the natural surroundings. Since Isamu was a friend of Ken Domon, his participation would enhance the commemorative meaning of the building. When Noguchi designed this garden, he didn't focus on the central sculpture. Never mind that, he'd say. It's just a stone. That's the easy part. What's difficult is to understand the entire space and to decide where and how to place the elements. Theme of flow. It's the first garden he designed. It's like a painting that fills the far wall, and it also serves to link the building to the surrounding environment. For materials, it uses river stones from the nearby Mogami River and dwarf bamboo that is long grown on these hillsides. The placement of the rocks makes wonderful use of the space between the hill and the building. Of course, there's no water, but as you gaze at the garden, you almost seem to hear the sound of running water. This garden was completed along with the building 7 or 8 years ago, and as time passes, it becomes more of a piece with the building and more unified with the surroundings.
Tear apart those patterns and look at the possibilities. We should be rethinking the garden in the context of modern architecture.
Within its limits, the Japanese garden swims, remarked the sculptor Isamu Noguchi. It works, it navigates, it floats within the imagination of the people who experience it. We are a landscape of all we have seen, Noguchi said. Can we really recreate nature? Or do we go on and do something other?